Okay, good evening and welcome to the 10 Mile River Scout Camps Museum. And we're really excited to have everybody here tonight. My name is Mitchell Slepian and I am chair of the museum. And this is a great way to start off our spring webinar season with Glenn Pontier, our co-director. Many of you probably know Glenn from prior webinars. He's probably been our most frequent presenter, and hopefully you've met him at the museum. And if you didn't meet him the last couple of summers, hopefully you meet him this summer. Maybe you know him from some of the things he's done in the area around 10 Mile River Scout Camps, where he's been very involved for many years. Okay, so before we get into the actual formal program about Narrowsburg, we need to go to a little bit about our camp. So to start, this is the map of the 10 Mile River Scout Camp area, and this is basically where we are, and you can look at it and see some of the key camps that we have, like Kiowa, and of course Aquahunga and Family Camp, and of course headquarters where the museum is. Next, the TMR Scout Museum was started in 1997, so we're in our 26th year this summer when we start in July, and we are dedicated to preserving the history and artifacts of the TMR Scout camps and of course the local area. And Glenn is very much a part of helping us do the work in the local area as our local historian. Okay, if you want to take a virtual tour of our museum, you're welcome to at tmrmuseum.org/historian. And you can watch a video of what we have at our museum, and it's on our YouTube channel. All right, next, this is where our TMR Museum information is. This is our website, social media, Instagram, Facebook, and other channels. And we also have, going into the next slide, you can call the museum, you could email the museum with questions at tmrmuseum.org, or you could also email me at chairman@tmrmuseum@gmail.com. That is the newest email address. We had a different one up until about 3 or 4 days ago, but we switched over to the Google web address, which we find is more effective. Okay, next thing. If you want to look at it, the best way to look at it on the Zoom platform, for those of you who aren't familiar, but I think we've all been way too involved with Zoom in the last 3 years or so, and it's great to see doing things in person. And sometimes Glenn even does some of these talks in person at the museum, and we will let you know when we do that. So you can hit the speaker button on your Zoom platform, and you can hit speaker and you will see Glenn or myself. And next, to chat, if you have questions, at the bottom of the screen, there's a chat box. So to ask a question, make a comment, click on chat, and then of course, just type in your question or comment, and we're happy to hear you. Next, now I'm going to introduce Glenn. As I said, Glenn Pontier is our co-director. He's been with us for a couple of summers, and he's done a lot of work for the museum. And some of the things he's done besides the museum, he lives along the Delaware River. He's the former editor of the River Reporter, and he was the executive director of the Renaissance and Catskill Fly Fishing Center and Museum. And he was also the public information officer for Sullivan County. And give us about a second or so, and I'm going to make Glenn the host, and you'll hear him instead of me. Glenn, that's 6 seconds.
All right, well, I guess I am the host now. And if you can hear me, we're gonna do a little program. I'm gonna share my screen, and all right.
Glenn,
So
just a quick note before you start. If you see anybody trying to get in through the waiting room, just let them in. I'm going to back in and do it, but go ahead.
All right. Well, 2 people have entered the waiting room, so that's good.
Let them in, because it won't let me in now.
Okay. So this is the iconic view of Narrowsburg, of course. Those of you that are live in the area or vacation here or work here or visit here, you know, the bridge, we're going to talk a little bit about bridges in the future. That's the Big Eddy in the foreground. You can see a number of buildings that you can identify there on Main Street, including the Arlington Hotel. And you can This is the Arlington Hotel. In the background, you can see the Landers Campground. And so there are a bunch of uh, buildings and things that are familiar to you, but we're gonna roll back a little bit. Uh, and the first thing I want to do is acknowledge uh, uh, the number of places that have contributed slides to this show. I've been to a number of websites, and if I haven't included you and you see a slide, let me know and we'll add you to the acknowledgement list. It's there's so many people that understand and know Narrowsburg. So those who don't know Narrowsburg, this is a kind of a view of the Northeast that shows you the star in the middle is Narrowsburg. It's not Scranton. It's along the Delaware River, of course, in New York. And across the river is Pennsylvania. I should add that for those of us that live in the River Valley, the river is not the border. The river is the center. And that's a concept that people that live anywhere but the valley, they look at they say, oh, that you live on the edge of Sullivan County or the edge of New York State. Well, that may be true politically. Geographically, we live in the middle of a river valley, and we may go to church on one side and shop on the other. Our bank may be on one side. We may go to dinner on the other side of the river. And there are bridges, and we'll talk a little bit about the one in Narrowsburg. Narrowsburg as a hamlet, nothing has defined it more than the river. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that. But the land underneath the hamlet, underneath the buildings, that's the geology. And the museum has a geological exhibit put together by the New York State Geological Survey. And if you're interested, we have the maps that go all the way from Port Jervis to Hancock that talk about what's under the ground. So if you want to, you can probably find us online, or you can come to the museum and look at the map and you find the street and where your house is, and we'll tell you what's under your house. So the story of Narrowsburg really starts with the geology, with the river valley. And then, of course, when we talk about human beings and people, the story starts with the Lenape, who were the original people. The Lenape, as some people call them, they call themselves Lenape. They referred to themselves as the original people. And while they didn't live here, this was their territory. They lived a little further south in New Jersey and Pennsylvania, and all the way across into New York City and Long Island, of course, Staten Island. And I'm not going to talk a lot about them. I have done a webinar on them, and you can find it on our YouTube channel. But if you're interested in knowing about the original people, this little book, it's almost 100 years old, published by Rutgers University Press. And it's a great introduction into the customs and the culture of Lenape. And so I put it up there so that those that are interested can kind of follow up on that. The first white settlers came from Connecticut, and they came to a place not in Narrowsburg. They were a little upriver in a place called Cushatunk. Maybe that's where the name Coshecton comes from. They lived originally in the Cushatunk settlement, was on the Pennsylvania side, but it's been recreated in a fort known as Fort Delaware. And of course, Fort Delaware is located in Narrowsburg. It's a wonderful attraction. It's run by the Delaware Company. And if you know John and Deborah Conway, they do a great job. If you haven't been to the fort, it's a good introduction to what colonial life was like. And it's one of the interesting facets of Narrowsburg. Of course, Narrowsburg is one of the communities in the town of Tustin. And Tustin is a political subdivision was formed in 1853. And I'm going to talk mostly about Narrowsburg, but I'm going to make a little reference to some of the other communities, and we're going to do that first, and then we'll hone in on Narrowsburg. These aren't all. There are other places that are Smith Switch, the 10 Mile River settlement, we call the Tustin settlement. There are other places that people have identified that refer to themselves, but these are kind of the main ones that people know of. Of course, Tustin itself was named for Benjamin Tustin. And he was originally from Long Island. He was educated. He was a physician. He lived in Goshen. Then when the revolution came, he became part of the Goshen militia. He was a colonel. He ended up fighting in the Battle of Minisink against Joseph Brandt's Iroquois and Tory forces. And that's where he lost his life. If you haven't been to the Minisink battleground, it's a great way to spend a couple of hours, some great hiking trails. What you're looking at in this picture is called Hospital Rock. And that's where Tustin and a number of men were killed. Tustin, just incidentally, was an interesting physician. He believed in vaccination. He was one of the early physicians. And so he vaccinated against smallpox. And of course, it was quite controversial, which I guess should surprise no one since it's still controversial. But so now I'm going to talk about some of the little hamlets now. And this is Beaver Brook. And up on the hill, you see the old Half Moon Lake Hotel. It was owned by one of the town of Tustin supervisors. It burned in 1943, so it doesn't exist anymore. Beaver Brook, as a community, is sparsely populated. This is a photo of them cutting ice on Fox Lake. Cutting ice is something that we're going to talk a little bit about because it happened all over before electricity and refrigeration came in. Beaver Brook is known historically for its many camps and hunting clubs. Of course, that's where the Boy Scout property, the headquarters, is located. It's been in the news lately. It's a little controversial because there's a proposal to. I'm just when I'm a little distracted because I'm letting people in here. There's a proposal to build a summer camp or an educational facility. So in the Beaver Brook area, I'm not going to get into that, but it's a vital part of the town, and it's something that folks are interested in. Of course, it is the home of the 10 Mile River Scout Reservation. It's on 95th year last year, 96 this year, formed in 1927. And it's been Franklin Roosevelt was instrumental in organizing it. If you haven't had a chance to come visit our museum, we have a video that talks about how it became organized and a lot of displays about the town. Of course, 9,500 or 400 acres has been or is being sold to the Conservation Fund. And this will leave about 2,500 acres for the Scouts. While the Conservation Fund owns it, they'll continue to manage it. And then they're going to work to give it to New York State. So the land will become available for use by the public and continued use by the Scouts. So all of this is in Beaver Brook. If you're interested, you can go to the Conservation Fund website. There'll be more information about it. I'm trying to get back here. Next, I'm going to talk a little bit about Lava. And Lava is a community on Route 52. Some discussion as to how it got its name. People wanted to call it Java, but that was already a name of a little community out in Western New York, so they called it Lava. It was once had more institutions than it does now. It has the Lava Volunteer Fire Department. At one time, there was a post office. It had its own postal address. There was a one-room schoolhouse. And it also had a number of boarding houses or hotels. The Lava House, this is a picture of the Lava House around 1900. And Elise Wood, many of you might have known her. She worked for Mike Price's office, lived on the flats. And she grew up in that house. And she likes to tell two stories. One was in the summer, she had to give up her room, and she and her siblings had to sleep in the barn because the rooms were rented to tourists. And the other story is that her father had been in World War I, and when he got his bonus after World War I, he used that money to bring in electricity. But the electricity didn't go into the house. It went into the chicken coop. And they used the electricity so that they could raise more eggs by providing a constant warmth and light for the chickens. And when they made enough money, then they moved electricity into the house. So a little picture. She remembers that story. She told me that story. One of the other communities is Luxton Lake. The lake doesn't exist anymore, but it was an African-American interracial community. There's a picture of Willie Mays advertising it. $100 down, you could own a little lot. Lots were kind of similar to Smallwood, if you're familiar in the town of Bethel. Beautiful lake, beautiful people. There was a lot of school teachers and firefighters and social workers and people in the 50s and 60s from New York City, a lot of African Americans. And it was one of the few places where African Americans lived along the river. There are others, but this was one. It's now, even today, it's an integrated community. One of the sad stories of the Buxton Lake is that it's a lake on the 10-Mile River, and there's a dam that made it into a lake. And when I guess you'd say the south side of the lake was being developed, there was a developer who was building roads and clearing the forest for building sites. And he used somebody who ran his heavy equipment over the dam. And through constant back and forth with these big heavy trucks, the dam was weakened and ultimately destroyed. Some people thought that the town didn't do anything to help. I don't think that's an unfair assessment. The weakened dam, some people said it shouldn't have come down. But I will tell you that at the time I was the editor of the River Reporter, and I went out to look at the dam and stood on the dam with the dam expert. Some people really thought he was a dam expert when he took the dam down. But we stood on it, and I asked him who had to give authority to take the dam down. And he said, I do. I said, if you want this dam removed, you just say that? And he said, yep, I'm the guy. And I said, well, how do you know whether to take it down? And he took me to the downriver side of the dam, and we looked over, and he said, you see, what color is that water? And I said, it's brown. He said, yes. And what color is the water in the lake? He said, well, it's clear. He said, so what you're seeing is the water taking the earthen part of the dam out. And as we stand here, it's being weakened. So I thanked them and I got off the dam. If you want to know more, I think it was Tina Spangler who did a little a film on the Luxton Lake. It was called Lucky Lake. If you go to YouTube, you can find it, and it tells some more of the story. It's one of those things that a lot of recriminations, but people lost their waterfront, and so the value of the properties was gone. It's an interesting story. The area around has now been developed, and a lot of people have rediscovered it, and the new homes have gone in. But it has a long time story to be told. One of the other settlements is the 10 Mile River settlement, the old Tustin settlement. There were a number of homes right where that's the Stone Arch Bridge. It still exists. And just on the left side of that bridge, you can see the structures, the remnants of the old homes. There was an original settlement there that was wiped out by a raid by the Native Americans. It was resettled in the 1850s and until 1927, when the Scouts acquired the property and they removed most of the buildings. It also had a one-room schoolhouse. The only buildings left, of course, are the Stone Arch Bridge and the old Tustin Church. And the Tustin Baptist Church still exists. You can see it when you're driving along Route 97, surrounded by a cemetery. It's still used now. There's usually a memorial service on Memorial Day. It's been used for weddings. Sometimes there's concerts there. That's owned by the Tustin Settlement Association. So now I'm going to focus in on Narrowsburg. We've kind of talked a little bit about Beaver Brook and Lucky Lake and the Tustin settlement. Of course, this is Narrowsburg. And it's an interesting community. Nothing has defined the community more than the geology, the geography, the Delaware River. And the river has had all kinds of effects on the town, from flooding along the flats. So people were hesitant to build there for many years. When the east and west branches of the Delaware were dammed and there was more flood control, people felt safer building on the flats. They flooded throughout the years. The rafting industry, strong, and the canoeing now use of the river. The river has really defined Narrowsburg, including its name. One of the things that threatened the existence of Narrowsburg were plans to put dams along the Delaware River. And in 1962, there were plans to put 58 reservoirs all around the country, including 27 dams between Hancock and Port Jervis. Now, these were never built. But of course, if they had been, there would have been one that had flooded out Narrowsburg. And National Park Service, one of the reasons why they are here, and of course, it's one of the controversies that's surrounded Narrowsburg for many years, but one of the reasons they're here is to protect the river. And when New York City and Philadelphia began to squabble over water, and plans for building dams to provide water either to New York City or to Philadelphia, to make sure there was a flow down to keep the salt back from Philadelphia. One of the ways to protect the Upper Delaware was to make it part of the Wild and Scenic River system, because all wild and scenic rivers have to be free flowing. So once it was included in the national park system, it prohibits the building of dams. Now, I know that the coming of the Park Service was controversial because some people thought, well, they're going to buy up all the property. But an interesting and unique kind of scheme was put together to allow people to live in this national park area, but keep the dams out. And the National Park Service, we can thank, as long as they're here, there will never be a dam built and people will be able to live here. There's been controversy over it. But we're part of the Upper Delaware Scenic and Recreational River. And that's a website. You can go and check out more about what the Park Service does. It's interesting. You see the rangers through Narrowsburg. They have their headquarters up on the Pennsylvania side, just around Milanville. And the way that we know that the river will be protected is through the Upper Delaware Council. You might recognize this building. It's in Narrowsburg. And it's a partnership of local, state, and federal governments and other agencies that their mission is to protect the Delaware and to kind of manage the resource. So they review building permits and zoning ordinances, and they require standards. And as long as those standards of protecting the river are met, people can live here, the Park Service won't condemn property, and all is right with the world. That's the theory. They've run into some issues now with funding, and I know they're looking for a lot of support, but they have a website, and it's if you'd like to know more about what they do, this is all part of the world that surrounds Narrowsburg. So let's talk a little bit about Narrowsburg, and that's of course the bridge. You can see the back of some of the buildings from Main Street, and that's the Big Eddy. And I want to spend a little time with this because the first name of Narrowsburg was Homan's Eddy. And Benjamin Holman was the first settler in the town. He lived here. For those of you that are interested in history, the kind of the Bible for understanding history for any community in Sullivan County is Quinlan's History of Sullivan County. And in Quinlan's history, he mentions Holman and he talks about him. And he talks about him as a compatriot of Tom Quick, who was the serial killer who had lived up and down the Delaware. Milford is associated with him. He killed many Native Americans. There's no indication that Benjamin Holman was part of that vendetta, but there is the claim that Tom Quick gave Benjamin Holman one of his rifles. Benjamin moved away, and it became known as Big Eddy. And for folks that are familiar, when you think of an eddy, technically an eddy is kind of a whirlpool. It's a place where the water moves back on itself. But all along the Delaware River, it has a little different meaning. And so we have rapids or rifts, and we have eddies or slow parts. And so they're not all whirlpools, but the Big Eddy is. And if you stood on the deck at Narrowsburg or on the bridge, and you looked out, sometimes depending on how the water is flowing, you can kind of see debris has collected in the middle of the Big Eddy because the water is moving around and kind of coming back in on itself. And has the distinction of being, so they claim, the narrowest part of the Delaware and the widest part of the Delaware at the Big Eddy, and the deepest under the bridge, said to be 100 feet deep. I don't know that it is the narrowest. I think there's some narrower places. And I'm sure that when you get down around Philadelphia, it's not the widest. But they're good distinctions. And calling it Big Eddy, it's kind of been a wonderful tradition. When I first moved here, the name of the phone company was the Big Eddy Phone Company. And people used to say, well, who's Big Eddy? But if you're new to the area, you'll notice that there are a lot of Long Eddy and Pond Eddy and Knights Eddy and Fishes Eddy. There are a lot of eddies that live along the river. It's I said the rafting was important. So from the 1700s, when Daniel Skinner took the first raft down the Delaware to Philadelphia and sold the wood, up until 1928, people floated the rafts down the Delaware, and virtually every tree was cut. And so this shows them putting together some of the rafts. They would take the logs and fasten them together, and then they would float them down. It would take 4 or 5 days. I do a little talk on Tales of the Raftsmen, and there's some interesting stories. But this was a huge impact on Narrowsburg. At one time, there were 5 hotels in Narrowsburg, and some of them had to do with the railroad that we'll talk about in a little while. Some of them had to do with the rafters. Some of them had to do with the people that came up to visit. But rafting from the middle of the 1700s until the early part of the 1900s was a huge industry in New York State, in Sullivan County, in the town of Tustin, and for Narrowsburg in particular. And I know Narrowsburg has a lumberjack celebration in the fall, and it kind of playing on this tradition. It's a good one and a real one. Here's a picture of them cutting ice on the Delaware at the Big Eddy, and they cut a lot of ice, not only on the lakes away from the river. They cut ice on the river. I've walked out on that ice. Sometimes the ice has been so thick that people could drive from the public access in Narrowsburg, the state DEC landing, over to the Pennsylvania access landing. I wouldn't recommend it, but people have done it. You see people out there fishing often, but here they are out cutting ice on the Delaware, on the Big Eddy. Aside from the river, the thing that has influenced and affected the town more than anything was the coming of the Erie Railroad. And between 1832 and 1861, the railroad was constructed in various segments. When it came through Narrowsburg population jumped up to about 600 people. You'd be hard pressed to find 600 people that live here and claim it full time. I think the 2020 census had about 500 people that lived here. I think there are 600 or more because some people, they divide their time between Narrowsburg and New York City or Northern Jersey. But the railroad played a huge role in Narrowsburg. It's still one of the places where they're double tracked. Most of the Erie Railroad, it's now Norfolk Southern, is a single track. And here you see a picture of the old stations. On one side was freight, and on the other side was passenger. This is, I believe, a picture. Actually, it says Narrowsburg. It might be Kellicoon, but it played a huge role. And when the Erie Railroad, or when the railroad came in and took down the station, they did it kind of under cover of night because people didn't want to lose the old historic railroad station. Little Lake Erie was constructed by the railroad and used to cut ice and used for water for the trains. Of course, in the early day, they were steam locomotives. This is a picture of the rail tracks. The building you see is what now houses the River Reporter. It's been a print shop, a cigar factory. It's been a number of different uses. Again, they're cutting ice uh, on the Little Lake Erie, named for the railroad. After the river and the railroad, the other big influence on Narrowsburg was Route 97. And here you see them constructing Route 97. There's a photo taken in around 1932. This is a little south of Narrowsburg, where they're making a rock cut. It was Route 97 was opened in 1939. They were officially opened. It was built in different sections. At one time, parts of it were called part of 17B. They had other names for it, but eventually it was called Route 97, the entire length from Port Jervis to Hancock. In 2002, Governor Pataki designated it as part of the scenic byway. I believe it was built originally as a scenic byway. So people knew it's just a gorgeous road. If you've done any traveling, you know that what I'm talking about. But here's a photo you might not have seen. This is August 1939 when they opened it. They're celebrating Route 97 Day, and this is a picture from Route 52. Looking down on the right would be what was the Century Hotel in Narrowsburg Inn. On the left is the yard by the school, and you see the Boy Scouts with the old hats and uniforms lined up, and a bunch of people, a lot of men wearing hats, the old cars. This way, it was a big deal, and people in Narrowsburg turned out, and it's just an interesting part of our history. Another part of Narrowsburg that's iconic are the bridges, of course, and all along the Delaware. To get from one side, to get from the New York side to the Pennsylvania side or back, originally they used a lot of ferries, and there were rope tow ferries. There was one at Dingman's Ferry. Now there's a Dingman's Bridge. There was one at the old Tustin community along Crawford Road. There was a rope tow. Along Eddy, there was a rope tow. There were a lot of places. And then they would build bridges. And what I love about this picture, it was a wooden bridge covered, but if you look at the arc of the way the wood is designed, this was a wooden structure, but it's the same arc that's used in today's metal bridge. This one was about 1900. It was taken out by high water. One of the hazards of crossing a river like the Delaware is that the bridges have to be high enough to survive the ice flows. This was the Narrowsburg Toll Bridge a few years later. If you know where the existing bridge is, just to the north of that, there's a little park area, a veterans memorial, and you see the abutment for the bridge. That's this bridge. Some of the same buildings you can recognize. And then, of course, we have the modern bridge. Notice the arc, right? It's the same as the wooden one. The Narrowsburg Bridge, it's an iconic view. It's just gorgeous. And here it is, in the autumn. And it's one of the things that defines our community. I want to talk a little bit about some of the things that have happened in the town, and I'm going to take you up a number of buildings on Main Street. This, of course, is the Arlington Hotel as it exists now, and you can tell by the cars, of course. But in the fire of 1893, it destroyed most of the Arlington Hotel and several other Main Street buildings. Most communities had fires at one time or another. This is the one that destroyed a goodly part of downtown Narrowsburg. When the hotel was rebuilt, it was rebuilt with indoor plumbing, was the first. And it's a kind of an interesting part of our history, one of the oldest buildings. we're going to visit it again because it's had a vibrant life in Narrowsburg. You can't talk about Narrowsburg honestly without talking about the Cortez landfill, which is a federal Superfund site. And this is on the downriver side of Narrowsburg on the flats. And it was a landfill used for many years by people. They put their garbage there, but it was also used to bury hazardous waste. And if you go to the website at the bottom, you can see every 5 years they do a review of the Cortez landfill site. This one was from 2020. And it'll be monitored probably forever. But in 1996, they took out 300 drums of hazardous liquids. And then later in the year, they removed 5,000 buried drums. And tractor trail loads of hazardous sludge and dump truck loads of contaminated soil. It was on the federal Superfund list because the National Park Service was here and was in a national park area. It was the subject of great controversy in Sullivan County, particularly in the town of Tustin. The man that brought in the hazardous waste, John Cortez, was a kind of good old boy, friends with a lot of people. And when the state was beginning a lawsuit to clean this up, they went to the town, a man named Michael Moore from the Attorney General's office, and he said to the town of Tustin, we want you to join in our lawsuit. The town was a little hesitant. They didn't want to spend the money, and they didn't want to be on the other side of a friend. And Michael Moore said, you're going to be part of this lawsuit, so you have to choose. You can either be a plaintiff or you can be a defendant. So the town became a plaintiff. And eventually the federal government moved in and cleaned up the area. As I said, it will never be entirely cleaned up. They monitor it, and there's still leachate that enters the Delaware River, but not in a sufficient amount to be a hazard. So one of the things that small towns all across New York State, and particularly Sullivan County, is they had newspapers. And I'm not sure I got the chronology exactly right, but Art Myers started the Narrowsburg News in 1929. And a year later, he acquired the White Lake Times. Who knew there was a newspaper in White Lake? And it became the News Times, called the Delaware Valley News or the Delaware Valley News Times. It was then purchased by Claude Hector, who had the print shop that was in that is now the office of the River Reporter. And Claude was the one actually that turned me on to the story of the Cortez landfill, because he'd be there in his office putting together the newspaper or printing flyers or something, and he'd see the tractor trailer truckloads go by at night. News Times was then sold to the Holy Eagle, which became the News Eagle. And that's where the News Eagle got its name. News was from the Narrowsburg News. And then eventually it stopped covering the area. And that was upsetting to a lot of people who wanted a newspaper. And so in 1977, Tom DiGaetani and Claude Hector and a bunch of people, Beth Peck and a lot of people started the River Reporter. And we're one of the two communities in Sullivan County that still has a newspaper. This is well, you probably recognize the building. It was Tegler's then. It became Ulrich and Baling later, and became a lot of things. It became the Nest. On the second floor is the Mexican restaurant. You see on the right in the pile of snow, it's kind of a vacant lot. That's where it's since been built up. It's a great old shot of Main Street. This is across the street. You recognize the Tustin Cup, which was Simon's Bake Shop. And to the left of that was Keenan's Pharmacy. And for a while, Simon's Bake Shop was a real estate office. It was the office of the River Reporter for a while. Keenan's Pharmacy had a little soda shop in it. And the pharmacist was one of he used to wear a mask when he walked to work, and sometimes in his pharmacy. He was one of the few people who wore a face mask because of the germs. We now have Peter's Pharmacy. It's not on Main Street, but this was one of the 50s, 60s, 70s, maybe 80s. Of course, on the left, you see the Tustin Theater and the Town Hall as it exists today. On the right is a poster. I didn't find a picture of the Park Theater because that's what it used to be called. At one time, it was the fire department. And then it became the Park Theater. And you see Gary Cooper and Madeline Carroll starring. I remember talking to somebody that played the organ when they had silent films there before they got the talkies in. So it goes back a while. I know if you're a scout listening to this, sometimes the scouts used to go down to the Park Theater and watch a movie. But this is 1941. So it's been a movie theater off and on. Now it's a legitimate theater. They still show movies there sometimes, but they have shows and Delaware Valley Opera and other people who are there. How many of you remember Snug Harbor? It was a gift shop. It was located on Main Street. And Joe and Dorothy Purcell, they ran it. They used to publish a little book called The Upper Delaware Drummer. And it was filled with stories about Sullivan County and Wayne County. And it's a good example of where the river was the center, not the border. So it didn't matter which side of the river you were on. It was all the same. It was all part of the Delaware. The Purcells actually lived in Grahamsville. And Joe Purcell was the Sullivan County clerk. He ran this for a number of years. And then later on, the shop closed. Kinney and Schneider General Store. You recognize that building? It later became Stranahan Store. Of course, this is the early 1900s. People have driven wagons. You see you think we have potholes. You look at that rutted road there. And then, of course, it became Stranahan Store, which it closed in 1991. Was a great hardware store. You could, if you wanted it, you could find it there. It was I'm waiting for it to reopen. Maybe I have a long wait, maybe I don't. Rasmussen's Home Furnishings on the right. You see the building as it was. It was Rasmussen's. Connected. We used to joke and say from the cradle to the grave, because they sold cradles and baby cribs, and of course it was connected to the funeral home. So, I bought chairs there and different items. On the left, you see it was a terrible fire, destroyed the building. It's subsequently now been purchased, and it's about to become, I'm told, a series of shops. We're glad to see it back. It has a storied history. It really dominates that part of Main Street. A wonderful building with a rich history. Probably half the people that live in Narrowsburg or have lived here for a while, some piece of their living room came from Rasmussen's. At Narrowsburg Feed and Grain, if you're looking at Narrowsburg, what dominates the skylight? The tallest building are the towers for the feed and grain mill. Of course, this is the new one. There was one there that burned in the 1980s. It was a tremendous fire. And fire trucks came from every direction. I mean, you could miles away, you could see the flames. Once a feed mill starts to burn, there's a lot of fuel. And they couldn't get a handle on it till they brought in the hook and ladder from Honesdale so they could get it high enough to shoot the water down in to where it was burning. Uh, and you know, I was with the river reporter at the time and just remember a sea of hoses from fire trucks. They were called in from everywhere. Of course, it was a major. This was then rebuilt. Another interesting thing that happened at the feed and grain mill. I remember one day sitting at the river reporter office and heard that a man had fallen into one of those silos, and he was okay. They got him out, and that's a testimony to the greatness of our, you know, first responders who were able to get the man out, because it's often not that lucky when somebody falls in. It's not something that happens often, but it happens. And if you go online and you check you know, people falling in feed and grain mill silos, you'll find them. But it's a wonderful store. I used to keep chickens and buy my feed there. It's one of two feed and grain mills. The other is Cochecton Mills, and it really it dominates the skylight of Narrowsburg. I'm going to switch gears a little bit and talk about some of these people. Art Myers, of course, we talked about. He's the one that started the Narrowsburg News. I'm going to talk about the Pecks. I want to talk a little bit about the Bailings just now. And those of you that have been around for a while might recognize Chris Bailings. His name was actually George. And Jay Frank, his name was John. And Dick Bailing, his name was Carl. So none of them went by their name, but Dick Bailing was the supervisor for a long time in the town of Tustin. And the other, all three of them were very active in the community. And, you know, if it needed to be done, you went to one of the Bailings and they were willing to help out. Chris would have been a former, I think it was a telephone company employee, and every year he'd get the phone company to contribute some money to a local charity. The Kellys, of course, Gene Kelly ran Kelly's Home, and Jack Kelly, he's the one that ran the Park Theater and the luncheonette across the street. But I want to just stop and pause for a minute about Art Peck, Beth, and Beth Peck. Of course, Pete's Market was originally a Peck's Market, and Art and Beth bought the old. Art started working at the old Ulrich and Bailing supermarket, and eventually he bought it. He changed his name to Peck's, and it was on Main Street. He moved it from Main Street to where the existing Pete's is, which was just a wooded area. And he opened that up as a shopping center. First the store, he expanded into Callicoon, and then into Livingston Manor, and then into Jeffersonville, and eventually into Eldred. And Art was a Renaissance man. He was an amazing man who had a number of health issues, and he struggled with those. But he restored cars, he built boats, he built clocks. He had sculpture. The Pecks had sculpture in their yard. He was just an amazing man, and a lot of the commercial development was as a result of him. The shape of Narrowsburg, he built where Pete's Market is today, and then he built the shopping center next to it, and then expanded on it, so that he moved a bunch of the commercial business from the main street out to that other area. He was a visionary in a lot of ways. And when he retired, he sold Peck's Market to his employees, and as part of an ESOP, and an employee-owned stock option plan. And so Peck's Markets to this day is owned by the employees through their retirement plan. Beth was equally a remarkable individual. And Beth was instrumental in the starting of the River Reporter, in the library. Art and Beth, when they sold the supermarket, they used that money and they endowed the library in Narrowsburg. They gifted it to the town. And Beth was also involved in the Historic Society. She was just a remarkable individual. And when I first moved to Narrowsburg, I'd grown up in Port Jervis and I'd grown up in Kingston. I was born in Kingston. And I wasn't quite sure if I was, if I could claim that I was native to the area. So I was having a conversation with Beth and I said, Beth, are you a native? And she said, oh, no, I'm not native. I said, oh, well, where are you from? And she said, I'm from Beach Lake, 6 miles away. So when Beth Peck didn't consider herself a native of Narrowsburg, because she was born a Rosencrantz in Beach Lake, I knew I couldn't claim to be a local or a native, having been born in Kingston. They're pictured with Matt McHugh, who was a great congressman, who was the one who actually got the Upper Delaware brought into the national park system. And he's the one that got it designated and protected it so that people could continue to live here. A remarkable congressman. There's another fellow that kind of changed the shape of Narrowsburg, and that's Tom DeGaetani. And he was married to Elaine Jagir. Many of you may know Elaine. And Tom had been this is a picture of him as a young man. I couldn't find one of him as he grew older, but he was one of the directors of Lincoln Center. He ran an arts consulting firm, traveled all over the world. And when he moved to Narrowsburg, he lived in a little A-frame on Crawford Road. He'd had a heart attack and decided to move here. He was a dynamo. And he started, together with Elaine, the Delaware Valley Arts Alliance. He started the River Reporter. He started the Narrowsburg Oktoberfest. He was instrumental in bringing the arts and a kind of cultural understanding to this area. I met him in 1977. We put out one issue. He made me the assistant editor. We put out one issue of the River Reporter. He had another heart attack and he died, and I became the editor. But some of the remarkable people that kind of changed the face of Narrowsburg. There are many others. And, the history of Narrowsburg is the history of people interacting and with a great entrepreneurial spirit and with a great sense of giving back to the community. Whether it's the Bailings, or the Ulriches, or the Venadas, or the Van Curens, or there are all kinds of people over the years have given back. Narrowsburg history, you may have seen these historic signs. One's on Main Street, and that's, of course, the Arlington Hotel. One's in front of the Upper Delaware Council building. They tell little stories, historic markers. We do have 3 buildings on the National Register of Historic Places. Of course, the Arlington Hotel and the Narrowsburg Methodist Church, which is across Little Lake Erie. If you haven't driven by, it looks like a lot of other churches, but it's has great historic value. And of course, the Kirk House on Kirk Road. It's a beautiful old house. And, James Kirk was an interesting guy, worked on the railroad. And if you're a member of the Tustin Historical Society, this month's Tustin Roots has a front page story, kind of a profile of James Kirk. And so I urge you to join the Tustin Historic Society, but also take a look at that article. Narrowsburg has walking trails. These were done in part through Sullivan Renaissance. One of them is the historic walking trail, and there's different signs on buildings, and one of them is, they're all unique village trails. They're free. They're a real opportunity to get healthy and to walk around and to see the community. Now, I want to talk a little bit about the tourism. Some of you listening to this may have come here because you came here, right? You visited and you decided you liked it, you wanted to stay. Well, back in the 1950s, here's Narrowsburg. In 1950, in New York City, they recreated a general store. And there's a lot of the old timers, the Fiegels and the Taglers and the Bailings and the Purcells, all, dressed the part, playing the kind of the backwoods hicks, saying, come on up and visit. It's a great place to hunt and to fish. And, there they are in the National Sportsman Show, advertising the Narrowsburg and the whole 10-mile river region. There have been a number of resorts in Narrowsburg. The Hillside Resort, of course. Here's a better picture of it, run by the Fiegels family. The building was destroyed by a fire in the 80s. Across the lake was a ski slope, which was mildly successful. It was on the south-facing side, so it had a struggle keeping the snow, but it was a popular resort. And one of the things that a lot of people knew Narrowsburg by the Hillside Resort. A lot of people also knew it by Peggy Runway Lodge. And here's another example of, it didn't matter which side of the river you were on. This was Narrowsburg. I know it's Darbytown, but it was Narrowsburg, they had a lodge and some cottages, and for many, many years, it was a very popular vacation spot. It burned down. A private home was constructed on it, so it doesn't exist anymore. But people remember it, and Peggy Runway was standing on the deck in Narrowsburg, and you're looking across the river. You can kind of see a waterfall depending on, how the leaves are. And that waterfall is Peggy Runway. And it was used as a runway for logs. And you go back to the rafting. And so as they were cutting the trees on the Pennsylvania side, they would put them in the stream and run them over the runway. And that's how it got its name. So maybe you knew that. Here's the Arlington Hotel again, as it exists today. For a while, the National Park Service had an information center on the first floor. Now it's an art exhibitions, there's galleries, they do a salon series, they have performances. The Delaware Valley Arts Alliance gives grants. They host Riverfest, the Big Eddy Film Festival. They do the Art and Sixes art show in the fall, and going into the winter. It's been adapted and reused in a really terrific way. Here's the gallery inside, and you look at that, see, kind of old looking building and a modern gallery inside. Delaware Valley Arts Alliance, again, started by Tom DiGaetani and Elaine Jagir. Riverfest, this year, it's July 23rd. It's got to be one of the most popular outdoor festivals, great arts and crafts, great opportunity to see people. It focuses on the river and on the arts. I don't know if you know, but it's modeled kind of like the Shad Fest down in Lambertville, New Jersey, which also has an art auction and has the same kind of activities. The idea of standing on a main street in a little small town and watching people bid for art, for artworks, and spend hundreds of dollars on art in the middle of the street in a little small town. I think it's inspiring. It's a great festival, and it's of course it's sponsored by DVAA. It's been around for 20 or 30 years now. The right, I want to move on to Narrowsburg. There's a film festival that TVA also runs called the Big Eddy Film Festival, after the Big Eddy. And one of the films that they showed, not this year, but I think 2 years ago, was Narrowsburg. It's called a documentary film called Narrowsburg. And you may be able to find it on Netflix or someplace. And it tells the story of of a French film producer and her mafioso husband. And he was a guy that came into town, kind of like the Rainmaker, kind of like the Music Man. And he was going to make Narrowsburg, he was going to put it on the map, and everybody's going to become famous. And so yeah, I don't know if you knew about the documentary film that was made about Richard Castellano and his wife. Interesting piece. And of course, Narrowsburg School, at one time there were all these one-room schoolhouses, and they were consolidated back in the 30s. And there were really, Lava had one, and Beaver Brook had one, and Tustin Settlement had a one-room schoolhouse. Everybody had a one-room schoolhouse. And they got consolidated into a rural district. And this happened in Narrowsburg in the 1930s. They then built this building, and it existed as a school for 60 years. And it was a K-12 school. I hear they're putting an addition onto it. That's St. Francis Church in the background. And it was a K-12 school. I think when my son went there were 290 kids from kindergarten through 12th grade. It later merged and became part of Sullivan West. So the merged central district became a merged district. The building was languished for a little while. Some people wanted to make it a hotel. Some people wanted to make it a alcohol rehab center. And in the end, we're thankful that it became the Narrowsburg Union. And the Wyden family bought it, and they made it into a business center. You can rent a truck. You can send UPS or FedEx. You can rent a space as an artist or as an office space. They talk about, they meet the needs of the creatives, the makers, and the professionals. They have a store called Catskill Curated. They have a welcome center. And it's another adaptive reuse of an old building. This is wonderful. It reminds me of the building in Ithaca that housed the Moosewood restaurant, which was another adaptive reuse. There's one in Milford that was turned into, there's a pizzeria and a barbershop in it now. So what do you do with these old buildings? If you're not going to tear them down, and you shouldn't tear them down, you're going to reuse them. And so this is a great example, terrific idea. They, on their grounds, run the Narrowsburg Farmers Market. We're just so fortunate. We have a farmers market in Callicoon. We have one in Narrowsburg. We have one in Barryville, and not to mention on the other side of Sullivan County. But it runs through the late spring to the early fall, and if you've been, you know what I'm talking about. And if you haven't been, it's the place to go to buy some vegetables. Narrowsburg holds an annual Independence Day parade, the thing to do since 1902. And there you see them lining up. It's at night, there's fireworks. There's usually a field day out on on the Narrowsburg Fireman's Field, which is also Landers Campground. But it's part of a great tradition, again, for 125 years, just about. And the Narrowsburg Field, where Landers Campground is now, it's owned by the fire company, but it was an airport. And from the mid 40s, for several years, that's the hangar. The hangar's still there, and that's where people they flew in. Where how are you going to get to Narrowsburg? You're going to fly in. That's pretty amazing, right? To think about. The fire company then used it, ran it for a couple of years as a campground, and then leased it to Landers. And now it's used as a campground, except a couple times a year. It's used for the Fireman's Field Day on the 4th of July. But of course, so Landers river trips, you see on the left, you see some of the little Adirondack style lean-tos, and on the right, you see one of the stores, the blockhouse. It's got a great use. Landers is the main canoe livery in Narrowsburg. There are other liveries, but Landers is the one that kind of started in the town of Tustin and is in Narrowsburg. And here, of course, people are enjoying the river. And we started with the river. We're going to go back to the river. It's if you haven't rafted or kayaked or canoed, hey, you're missing one of the all-time reasons for living here. We have some upcoming programs about local history, and on May 10th, I'm going to talk about monarch butterflies. And on May 17th at the Tustin Town Hall, I'm going to be there, and I'm going to tell some of the tales of the raftsmen. These are, many of them are hilarious. These are the actual stories that raftsmen told. And then every Tuesday evening in July and the beginning of August at the TMR Scout Museum, which is on Crystal Lake Road, it's at around 7 o'clock on Tuesday nights. We have evening history programs, and we're going to do more tales of the raftsmen, and we'll tell some local ghost stories, and we'll tell about the Lenape Indians, and we'll talk about some more butterflies and all. So if you want details of those, you'll be able to get them on the tmrmuseum.org website. And this is where we came in, and so this is where we're going to go out. What I'm going to do is turn the program back over to Mitchell. And if we've got questions, I'm looking for Mitchell's name. I want to make him the host here. All right, take it away, Mitchell. All right.
Okay, thank you very much, Glenn. This was fantastic. Really appreciate the talk. It brings back a lot of memories. Some of the things were way before my time, but certainly remember going to Stranahan's, the hardware store, with some of the people who were watching the webinar when I was either a camper or a staff member of Chappie Troop 721 back in the 80s. And of course, Beach Lake, and of course, Carousel Park, which is part of it, where the wind patrols used to go to ride the water slide and eat some pizza. So it was a lot of fun. Anyway, so if we have any questions, I'd love to take them. I see a lot of comments of people who enjoyed it, and note some people who knew about the pharmacy and different pharmacists who owned it, and some other people who grew up in the area. So we'll give it a moment or two. Again, you could put your questions into the chat room, and that would be fine, and we'll read them out for Glenn. And I am going to share my screen, and just give me one moment, because it's just a little bit more of the PowerPoint that we showed at the beginning that we just want to finish up with. Okay, just zip through some of the slides really quick, and while I'm still looking for questions, I don't see anything yet, but while I'm talking, I'll take a quick look. All right, again, if you want to visit, I know that we said this at the beginning, we just want to give a quick reminder of our website, social media channels. We have Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. This will be on YouTube probably tomorrow or Friday. And let's just keep going. Again, you can call us at 845-252-2063. You're much better off emailing us than calling us. So we have the questions at TMR Museum or chairman TMR Museum at Gmail. Okay, the one question I see that just come in is it possible to get a recording? And yes, we will definitely be on YouTube, as I just mentioned, in a day or so. And jumping in, the next webinar that we have is May 10th at 7 o'clock Eastern Time. Registration info is on our website, and we'll be setting up events and some social media feeds. So check out our Facebook page to see that, and probably our Instagram and Twitter feeds. Definitely Facebook, it'll be there tomorrow. And we are going to actually be having a monarch butterfly exhibit that Glenn is working on right now in the museum when we open. The website will also list the days that we're open for the summer, our regular days. And then we are open a couple of weekends when there are different activities going on with the Boy Scouts in the next couple of weeks. And the museum will be open Saturday and Sunday during those weekends. And whether you're a scout or not a scout, you're welcome to come and visit. The hours are on the website. You can certainly take a look. Let's see what else we have. Do you know, okay, Glenn, do you know who constructed the stone arch bridge? I know you know that.
Well, you know, I don't know who constructed the stone arch bridge. It's one of 5 in Sullivan County. Most people are familiar with the 3 arch bridge in Jeffersonville, but there's also another one in Jeffersonville on Sickmiller Road. There's one up in Hankins and another one up in that area. I don't know who constructed it. I know that the town did reconstruction on it after one of the storms, but I don't know. That's a great question. In looking at some of the comments, somebody put in for my information that it was the pharmacist wearing the mask was Mr. Carter. And yes, I remember that. His wife was Janet, and they were singular, and they were very lovely people. Somebody else commented that the destruction of the dam devastated the community, and we're talking about Luxton Lake, and that's absolutely true. It was unfair. It may have been racially motivated, not the cause of the destruction, but the failure to remedy it. It's not a happy moment for the community. And it's such a lovely area and such a lovely lake. So the interesting thing, one of the interesting things about Narrowsburg and the town of Tustin in particular is it's always had a more mixed group of people. Part of that had to do with the railroad. And when you have a railroad in a community, you get a lot of working men that do a lot of traveling. And they don't come from the same cultural background as the farmers and the lumbermen who live in an area and don't do a lot of traveling. So you get some cultural clashes. So the railroad men were often Democrats, socialists, a little more widely experienced people. And the people that lived here that didn't travel were a little more conservative, a little more traditional. And so Narrowsburg was one of these areas that had a mix. Some communities didn't, but Narrowsburg did. And that's so some of the early supervisors were Democrats, as opposed to a lot of the communities here where they were all kind of rock rib Republican. So it's an interesting background. And, you know, this is a great place. And as a former newspaper editor, you know, you tell the story. And sometimes it hurts a little to tell the story, but you tell the story. And by and large, the story of Narrowsburg is a wonderful story.
That's really, really interesting. Thank you, Glenn. Next thing, I don't see anything else in the chat room, but we'll give it another second to see if it does come in. On that note, again, if you do have any other questions, you can email me or you could send a note to any of our social media feeds. Hopefully we see you on the 10th, and more important, we want to see you in the museum, either on the weekends we're open in the spring, and of course, all summer long. Now, anyone who wants to become a member of the museum, they're welcome to. It's inexpensive, it's only $25, and I see just a couple of thank yous, which is great, and I want to thank Glenn. And then the next thing we just want to say is you can take the tour at tmrmuseum.org/historian, and you can earn the scouts can earn the 10 Mile River Scout Award hiking awards, and information's on our website. Now, if you're interested, we'd love any type of support. Again, you can donate anything to tmrmuseum.org/donate or become a member. And like I said, any type of financial donation is always appreciated. None of us get paid for any of this. We do everything, whether it's the manual labor to keep the building in shape or running this stuff like this at no cost. And we also accept plenty of scouting memorabilia. So if you have any old patches, jackets, or anything else, we're happy to take a look at that and possibly display it in our museum. And on that note, I just want to check. I see we have one more question maybe. Oh, can you speak about the inn's property?
Well, the way I read it, it says inn is free, and there was a place called Innisfree,
Right.
which was in Milanville, and it was a kind of a community of people that started. I don't know if Innisfree is still there functioning, but it's been many things. It was a Montessori school for a while. It was the home of the Unitarian Fellowship. It was kind of a commune during the 60s. So if that's the property you're talking about in Milanville, was an inn also, I see written. And yes, that's the property. It was like a B&B. You could rent a room or a little apartment there. I don't know where it is now, but it was wasn't in Narrowsburg. And so I tell you, if you extend beyond Narrowsburg, up and down the river in any direction, the stories are equally fantastic. This is a wonderful place. It's been filled by really great people.
Thank you, Glenn. And once again, thank you everyone for attending. And as chairman, I really appreciate this. And as chairman, just want to do a quick shout out. Thank you, Mom and my sister, for attending. It's always good when you're supported by your family and some of your friends that you grew up with in camp. And on that note, hopefully we see you on May 10th, and of course in the museum during the summer. And feel free to contact us via email and social media with any questions, and we'll see you next time. Have a great night.